Timor-Leste, be also known as East Timor, see officially the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste, is a country in Southeast Asia. It comprises the eastern half of the island of Timor, the coastal exclave of Oecussi in the island's northwest, and the outer islands of Arturo and Jaco. Timor-Leste shares a land border with Indonesia to the west, and Australia is the country's southern neighbor, across the Timor Sea. The country's size is 14,950 square kilometers 5,770 sq mi. Dili, on the north coast of Timor, is its capital and largest city. Timor was settled over time by various Papuan and Austronesian peoples, which created a diverse mix of cultures and languages linked to both Southeast Asia and Melanesia. East Timor came under Portuguese influence in the 16th century, remaining a Portuguese colony until 1975. Internal conflict preceded a unilateral declaration of independence and an Indonesian invasion and annexation. The subsequent Indonesian occupation was characterized by extreme abuses of human rights, including torture and massacres, a series of events named the East Timor Genocide. Resistance continued throughout Indonesian rule, and in 1999, a United Nations-sponsored act of self-determination led to Indonesia relinquishing control of the territory. On May 20, 2002, as Timor-Leste, it became the first new sovereign state of the 21st century. That same year, relations with Indonesia were established and normalized, with Indonesia also supporting Timor-Leste's succession into ASEAN. The national government runs on a semi-presidential system, with the popularly elected president sharing power with a prime minister appointed by the national parliament. Power is centralized under the national government, although many local leaders have informal influence. The country maintains a policy of international cooperation and is a member of the Community of Portuguese-language countries and observer of the Pacific Islands Forum, and will join the ASEAN in October 2025. The country remains relatively poor, with an economy that relies heavily on natural resources, especially oil, and foreign aid. The total population is over 1.34 million at the 2022 census and is heavily skewed towards young people due to a high fertility rate. Education has led to increasing literacy over the past half-century, especially in the two official languages of Portuguese and Tetum. High ethnic and linguistic diversity is reflected by the 30 indigenous languages spoken in the country. The majority of the population is Catholic, which coexists alongside strong local traditions and beliefs, especially in rural areas. Name Timor is derived from Timor, meaning east in Malay, thus resulting in a tautological place name meaning east-east. In Indonesian, this results in the name Timor Timor, the name of the former de facto Indonesian province. Timor-Leste is used instead to refer to the country. In Portuguese, the country is called Timor-Leste, leste meaning east. In Tetum, it is Timor-Leste. Leste can be literally translated as where the sun rises. 1415. The official names under its constitution are Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste in English. 1617. República Democrática de Timor-Leste in Portuguese, 18, and República Democrática Timor-Leste in Tetum, 19. The official short form of the name is Timor-Leste, 17, and it uses the ISO codes TELS and TEL, 20. History main article, History of Timor-Leste Prehistory and Classical Iraman article, Pre-colonial Timor Sea also, Greater India cultural remains at Jaramalai on the eastern tip of Timor-Leste have been dated to 42,000 years ago, 21. The first known inhabitants are those who arrived during the Australo-Melanesian migration through the region, likely bringing the precursors to today's Papuan. Languages, 22. A later migration of Austroasiatic speakers is suspected, although no such languages remain. 23-24. The arrival of Austronesian peoples brought new languages and merged with existing cultures on the island. 25. Timorese origin myths recount settlers sailing around the eastern end of the island before landing in the south. These people are sometimes noted as being from the Malay Peninsula or the Minangkabau Highlands of Sumatra. 26. Austronesian migration to Timor may be associated with the development of agriculture on the island. 27-28. While information is limited about the political system of Timor during this period, the island had developed an interconnected series of polities governed by customary law. Small communities centered around a particular sacred house were part of wider sukos or principalities, which were themselves part of larger kingdoms led by a liurai. Authority within these kingdoms was held by two individuals, with the worldly power of the liurai balanced by the spiritual power of a rainain, who was generally associated with the primary sacred house of the kingdom. These polities were numerous and saw shifting alliances and relations, but many were stable enough that they survived from initial European documentation in the 16th century until the end of Portuguese rule. 1115 from perhaps the 13th century, the island exported sandalwood. 267, which was valued both for its use in crafting and as a source of perfume. Timor was included in Southeast Asian, Chinese, and Indian trading networks by the 14th century, exporting sandalwood. 31 honey and wax. The island was recorded by the Majapahit Empire as a source of tribute. 89, it was sandalwood that attracted European explorers to the island in the early 16th century. Early European presence was limited to trade. 33, with the first Portuguese settlement being on the nearby island of Solar. 90. Portuguese era 17691975 main article, Portuguese Timor black, red and white hand-drawn illustrations showing a battle between Portuguese forces and their allies against an army of rebelling kingdoms. The Battle of Calaco in 1726, part of a rebellion. Early Portuguese presence on Timor was very limited. Trade was directed through Portuguese settlements on nearby islands. Only in the 17th century did they establish a more direct presence on the island, a consequence of being driven out of other islands by the Dutch. 267, after Solar was lost in 1613, the Portuguese moved to Flores. In 1646, the capital moved to Kupang on Timor's west, before Kupang too was lost to the Dutch in 1652. The Portuguese then moved to Lifo, in what is now Timor-Leste's Oecussi exclave. 90 effective European occupation in the east of the island only began in 1769, when the city of Dili was founded, although actual control remained highly limited. 34 A definitive border between the Dutch and Portuguese parts of the island was established by the Permanent Court of Arbitration in 1914 and remains the international boundary between the successor states Indonesia and Timor-Leste, respectively. 35 For the Portuguese, East Timor remained little more than a neglected trading post, with minimal investment in infrastructure and education, until the late 19th century. Even when Portugal established actual control over the interior of its colony, investment remained minimal. 269-273 Sandalwood continued to be the main export crop and coffee exports became significant in the mid-19th century. 30 At the beginning of the 20th century, a faltering domestic economy prompted the Portuguese to extract greater wealth from its colonies, which was met with East Timorese resistance. 31 The colony was seen as an economic burden during the Great Depression and received little support or management from Portugal. 269 During World War II, Dili was occupied by the Allies in 1941, and later by the Japanese beginning in 1942. The mountainous interior of the colony became the scene of a guerrilla campaign, known as the Battle of Timor, waged by East Timorese volunteers and allied forces against the Japanese. The struggle killed between 40,000 and 70,000 East Timorese civilians. 36. The Japanese eventually drove the last of the Australian and Allied forces out in early 1943. 37 Portuguese control resumed, however, after Japanese surrender at the end of World War II. 38 Portugal began investment in the colony in the 1950s, funding education and promoting coffee exports, but the economy did not improve substantially and infrastructure improvements were limited. 29-69 Yearly growth rates remained low, near 2.39. Following the 1974 Portuguese Revolution, Portugal effectively abandoned its colony in Timor, and civil war between East Timorese political parties broke out in 1975. The Revolutionary Front for an Independent East Timor Fretilin resisted a Timorese Democratic Union coup attempt in August 1975, 40 and unilaterally declared independence on November 28, 1975. Fearing a communist state within the Indonesian archipelago, the Indonesian military launched an invasion of East Timor on 7 December 1975, 41. Indonesia declared East Timor its 27th province on 17 July 1976, 42. The United Nations Security Council opposed the invasion, and the territory's nominal status in the UN remained as non-self-governing territory under Portuguese administration. 43 Indonesian occupation 1975-1999. Main articles: Indonesian occupation of East Timor and Timor protesters holding a sign saying Indonesia out of East Timor now. A demonstration for independence from Indonesia held in Australia during September 1999. Fred Island resisted the invasion, initially as an army, holding territory until November 1978, and then as a guerrilla resistance. 44 The Indonesian occupation of Timor was marked by violence and brutality. A detailed statistical report prepared for the Commission for Reception, Truth and Reconciliation in East Timor cited a minimum of 102,800 conflict-related deaths in the period between 1974 and 1999, including approximately 18,600 killings and 84,200 excess deaths from hunger and illness. The total number of conflict-related deaths during this period is difficult to determine due to a lack of data. One estimate based on Portuguese, Indonesian, and Catholic Church data suggests it may have been as high as 200,000. 45 Repression and restrictions counteracted improvements in health and education infrastructure and services, meaning there was little overall improvement in living standards. Economic growth mostly benefited immigrants from elsewhere in Indonesia. 29. 271 A huge expansion of education was intended to increase Indonesian language use and internal security as much as it was for development. 46 The 1991 massacre of more than 200 demonstrators by the Indonesian military was a turning point for the independence cause and brought increased international pressure on Indonesia. Following the resignation of Indonesian President Suharto. 44 The new president B.J. Habibie, prompted by a letter from Australian Prime Minister John Howard, decided to hold a referendum on independence. 47. A unsponsored agreement between Indonesia and Portugal allowed for a unsupervised popular referendum in August 1999. A clear vote for independence was met with a punitive campaign of violence by East Timorese pro-integration militias supported by elements of the Indonesian military. In response, the Indonesian government allowed a multinational peacekeeping force, Interfet, to restore order and aid East Timorese refugees and internally displaced persons. 48. On October 25, 1999, the administration of East Timor was taken over by the UN through the United Nations Transitional Administration in East Timor UNTIT. 4950 Interfet deployment ended in February 2000 with the transfer of military command to the UN. 51. Contemporary Irasi, also, East Timor independence and United Nations administered East Timor. Jos Ramos Horta in traditional formal wear talking to reporters. Ramos Horta, 1996 Nobel Peace Prize winner, 4th and 7th President of Timor-Leste. On August 30, 2001, the East Timorese voted in their first election organized by the UN to elect members of the Constituent Assembly. 1652. On March 22, 2002, the Constituent Assembly approved the Constitution. 16. By May 2002, more than 205,000 refugees had returned. 53. On May 20, 2002, the Constitution of the Democratic Republic of Timor-Leste came into force and Timor-Leste was recognized as independent by the UN. 50-54. The Constituent Assembly was renamed the National Parliament, and Zanana Gusmo was elected as the country's first president. 55. On September 27, 2002, the country became a UN member state. 56. In 2006, a crisis of unrest and factional fighting forced 155,000 people to flee their homes. The United Nations sent in security forces to restore order. 57-58. The following year, Gusmo declined to run for another term. While there were minor incidents in the build-up to the mid-year presidential elections, the process was peaceful overall and Jos Ramos Horta was elected president. 59-60. In June 2007, Gusmo ran in the parliamentary elections and became prime minister at the head of the National Congress for Timorese Reconstruction Senate Party. In February 2008, Ramos Horta was critically injured in an attempted assassination. Prime Minister Gusmo also faced gunfire separately but escaped unharmed. Australian reinforcements were immediately sent to help keep order. 61. In March 2011, the UN handed over operational control of the police force to the Timor-Leste authorities. The United Nations ended its peacekeeping mission on 31 December 2012. 57 Francisco Guterres of the center-left Fretilin Party became president in May 2017. 62. The leader of Fretilin, Mari Alkatiri, formed a coalition government after the July 2017 parliamentary election. This government soon fell, leading to a second general election in May 2018. 63. In June 2018, former president and independence fighter Tor Maiten Ruak became the new prime minister. 64. Jose Ramos Horta again became president on May 20, 2022 after winning the April 2022 presidential election runoff against Francisco Guterres. 65. Politics and government. Main article, Politics of Timor-Leste. Xanana Gusmo in a Western-style suit. Xanana Gusmo, the first East Timorese president after the end of Indonesian occupation. The political system of Timor-Leste is semi-presidential, based upon the Portuguese system. 66-67, 175. The Constitution establishes both this separation of executive powers between the president and the prime minister, and the separation of powers between the executive, legislature, and judiciary. 68. 12 individuals are not allowed to participate in both the legislature and the executive branch. The legislature is intended to provide a check on the executive. In practice, the executive has maintained control of the legislature under all political parties, reflecting the dominance of individual leaders within political parties and coalitions. 67. 174. The executive, through the Council of Ministers, also holds some formal legislative powers. 67. 175. The judiciary operates independently, although there are instances of executive interference. 68. 13. 39. 69. Some courts shift between locations to improve access for those in more isolated areas. 69. Despite political rhetoric, the Constitution and democratic institutions have been followed by politicians, and changes of government are peaceful. 68. 15. 42. Elections are run by an independent body. 70. 216 and turnout is high, ranging from around 70% to 85. 68. 1771. The political system has wide public acceptance. 68. 1772. 106. The head of state of Timor-Leste is the president of the republic, who is elected by popular vote for a 5-year term, 4-4-4, and can serve a maximum of 2 terms. 69. Formally, the directly elected president holds relatively limited powers compared to those in similar systems, with no power over the appointment and dismissal of the prime minister and the council of ministers. However, as they are directly elected, past presidents have wielded great informal power and influence. 67. 175. The president does have the power to veto government legislation, initiate referendums, and to dissolve parliament in the event that it is unable to form a government or pass a budget. 4-4-4. If the president vetoes a legislative action, the parliament can overturn the veto with a 2/3 majority. 68. 10. The prime minister is chosen by the parliament, with the president appointing the leader of the majority party or coalition as prime minister of Timor-Leste and the cabinet on the proposal of the latter. 68. 1073. As head of government, the prime minister presides over the cabinet. 73. White building rising just above the palm trees surrounding Ith National Parliament, fronted by flags of the community of Portuguese language country as representative in the unicameral national parliament, are elected by popular vote to a 5-year term. 69. The number of seats can vary from a minimum of 52 to a maximum of 65. Parties must achieve 3% of the vote to enter parliament, with seats for qualifying parties allocated using the D'Hondt method. 73. Elections occur within the framework of a competitive multi-party system. Upon independence, power was held by the Fretilin political party, which was formed shortly before the Indonesian invasion and led its resistance. Given its history, Fretilin viewed itself as the natural party of government and supported a multi-party system, expecting the development of a dominant party system. Support from the United Nations and the international community, both before and after independence, allowed the nascent political system to survive shocks such as the 2006 crisis. 67. 173. Candidates in parliamentary elections run in a single national district in a party list system. 1 in 3 of all candidates presented by political parties must be women. This system promotes a diversity of political parties but gives voters little influence over the individual candidates selected by each party. 67. 175-176 women hold more than a third of parliamentary seats, with parties required by law to run female candidates, but they are less prominent at other levels and within party leadership. 69. Political divisions exist along class lines and along. There is broadly a divide between eastern and western areas of the country, stemming from differences that arose under Indonesian rule. Fretilin in particular is strongly linked to the eastern areas. 67. 176-177 political parties are more closely associated with prominent personalities more than with ideology. 68. 1674. The National Congress for Timorese Reconstruction became the main opposition to Fretilin, following its establishment to allow Zanana Gusmo to run for prime minister in the 2007 parliamentary elections. 67. 168-169. 75. While both major parties have been relatively stable, they remain led by an old guard of individuals who came to prominence during the resistance against Indonesia. 67. 175-68, 10-11-76-77 Politics and administration is centered in the capital Dili, with the national government responsible for most civil services. 68. 9. 36 Oecussi, separated from the rest of the country by Indonesian territory, is a special administrative region with some autonomy. 67. 180 The National Police of Timor-Leste and Timor-Leste Defense Force have held a monopoly on violence since 2008 and very few guns are present outside of these organizations. 68-8 While there are allegations of abuse of power, there is some judicial oversight of police and public trust in the institution has grown. 69 An active civil society functions independently of the government, as do media outlets. 68 11-12 Civil society organizations are concentrated in the capital, including student groups. Due to the structure of the economy, there are no powerful trade unions. 68-17 The Catholic Church has strong influence in the country. 68-40 Foreign Relations and Militarism Articles. Foreign Relations of Timor-Leste and Timor-Leste Defense Force protesters holding a sign saying, "Don't steal my oil," below artwork of kangaroos hopping away with buckets. Demonstration against Australia in December 2013. International cooperation has always been important to Timor-Leste. Donor funds made up 80% of the budget before oil revenues began to replace them. 68-40-44 International forces also provided security, with 5 on missions sent to the country from 1999. The final one, the United Nations Integrated Mission in East Timor, began after the 2006 East Timorese crisis and concluded in 2012. 78-14 Timor-Leste formally applied to join ASEAN in 2011. 68. 42-44-79 and was granted observer status and accepted in principle in November 2022. 80. Despite the nationalist political leadership promoting closer ties with Melanesian states, the country has targeted ASEAN membership since before its independence, with its leaders stating that joining Pacific bodies would have precluded ASEAN membership. Timor-Leste is thus an observer to the Pacific Islands Forum and the Melanesian Spearhead Group. More broadly, the country is a leader within the Group of 7 plus G7 plus, an organization of fragile states. It is also a member of the Community of Portuguese-language countries. 68, 42, 44, 81 ASEAN membership was sought for economic and security reasons, including to improve the relationship with Indonesia. Nonetheless, the process has been slow due to a lack of support from some ASEAN states and concerns about Timor-Leste's institutional capacity to meet the ASEAN's commitments. 78-10-11-82 As part of its efforts to demonstrate commitment and capacity, Timor-Leste had established diplomatic missions in each ASEAN member state by 2016. On May 27, 2025, Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, ASEAN chair for the year, announced that Timor-Leste would be admitted as the regional bloc's 11th full member during the ASEAN summit scheduled for October 2025 in Kuala Lumpur, subject to the completion of remaining obligations under the economic pillar. 80 to continuing bilateral donors include Australia, Portugal, Germany, and Japan, and Timor-Leste has a reputation for effectively and transparently using donor funds. Good relations with Australia and with Indonesia are a policy goal for the government, despite historical and more recent tensions. These countries are important economic partners and provide most transport links to the country. 68, 40-44 China has also increased its presence by contributing to infrastructure in Dili. 78. 12. The relationship with Australia was dominated from before independence by disputes over natural resources in the ocean between them, hampering the establishment of a mutually agreed border. The dominance of Australian hard power led Timor-Leste to utilize public diplomacy and forums for international law to push their case, 83-84. The dispute was resolved in 2018 following conciliation procedures 85 before the Permanent Court of Arbitration, when the two states established by treaty a maritime boundary between them along with an agreement on natural resource revenues, 86-87. The Timor-Leste Defense Force FVDTL was established in 2001, replacing FLINTL, and was restructured following the events of 2006. It is responsible not only for safeguarding against external threats, but also for addressing violent crime, a role it shares with the National Police of Timor-Leste. These forces remain small, 2,200 soldiers in the regular army and 80 in a naval component. A single aircraft and 7 patrol boats are operated, and there are plans to expand the naval component. There is some military cooperation with Australia, Portugal, and the United States, 88. Administrative Divisions. Main articles: Subdivisions of Timor-Leste, Municipalities of Timor-Leste, Administrative Posts of Timor-Leste, and Sucos of Timor-Leste. Labeled Map of Timor-Leste divided into its 14 municipalities. 14 municipalities of Timor-Leste. Timor-Leste is divided into 14 municipalities, which in turn are subdivided into 64 administrative posts, 442 Sucos villages, and 2,225 aldeas hamlets. 89-91. The existing system of municipalities and administrative posts was established during Portuguese rule. 94.3. While decentralization is mentioned in the Constitution, administrative powers generally remain with the national government operating out of Dili. 95.2. Upon independence, there was debate about how to implement decentralization. Various proposed models would create different levels of administration between the Sucos and the central government. In most proposals, there were no specific provisions for Suco-level governance, and they were expected to continue to exist as mostly traditional spaces, identifying communities rather than being part of the civil administration. In the end, the existing districts were kept and renamed municipalities in 2009 and received very few powers. 72, 88, 92. In 2016, changes were made so that each municipality is led by a civil servant appointed by the central government. This civil servant is advised by locally elected leaders. 94.4.7. The isolated Oecussi municipality, which has a strong identity and is fully surrounded by Indonesian territory, is specified by Articles 5 and 71 of the 2002 Constitution to be governed by a special administrative policy and economic regime. Law 3 2014 of June 18, 2014 implemented this constitutional provision, which went into effect in January 2015, turning Oecussi into a special administrative region. The region began operating its own civil service in June 2015, 96-97. In January 2022, the island of Arturo, formerly an administrative post of Dili, became its own municipality. 91. Due to its small population, which the government states is insufficient to elect a municipal assembly, there are plans to convert Arturo to a special economic zone similar to Oecussi. 98. Administration. In the lowest levels of the administrative system of Timor-Leste, the aldeas and sucos generally reflects traditional customs. 95. 1. Reflecting community identity and relationships between local households. 99. 4. Sucos generally contain 2,000 to 3,000 inhabitants. Their long persistence and links to local governance means the Sucos are the level of government that is linked to community identities rather than any high level of administration. 72. 89. Such relationships, however, are associated specifically with the kinship groups within that land, rather than the land itself. 100. 50 to 53. Relationships between Sucos also reflect customary practices, for example through the reciprocal exchanging of support for local initiatives. 99. 9. Laws passed in 2004 provided for the election of some Suco officials but assigned these positions no formal powers. An updated law in 2009 established the expected mandate of these positions, although it continued to leave them outside of the formal state system, reliant on municipal governments to provide formal administration and services. 72. 94-97. Further clarification was given in 2016, which entrenched the treatment of Sucos and aldeas more as communities than formal levels of administration. Despite this lack of formal association with the state, Suko leaders hold great influence and are often seen by their community as representatives of the state. They have responsibilities usually associated with civic administration. 94. 710 Geographiman article, Geography of Timor-Leste, relief map of Timor-Leste showing the mountainous interior map of Timor-Leste located between Southeast Asia and the South Pacific. 101. 2. The island of Timor is the largest of the Lesser Sunda Islands, which lie within the Malay archipelago. 102. 1. As such, Timor forms part of the Wallachia region, the boundary region between Asia and Oceania, along with the Lesser Sundas, Sulawesi, and the Maluku Islands. Citation needed. The island is surrounded by the Ambai and wetter straits of the rougher Banda Sea in the north and the calmer Timor Sea in the south. 101. 103 Timor-Leste shares the island with Indonesia, with Indonesian territory separating the Oecussi exclave from the rest of the country. The island of Arturo lies north of the mainland. 101. 2. With the fourth area being the small island of Jaco. The Savu Sea lies north of Oecussi. 104. 1. The country is about 265 kilometers 165 mi long and 97 kilometers 60 mi wide, with a total land area of 14,874 square kilometers 5,743 sq mi. 102. 1. This territory is situated between 815 S 1030 S latitude and 1 to 550 E 12730 E longitude. 105. 2. The country's coastline covers around 700 kilometers 430 mi. 102. 27. While the main land border with Indonesia is 125 kilometers 78 mi long, and the Oecussi land border is around 100 kilometers 62 mi long. 104. 1. Maritime borders exist with Australia to the south and Indonesia elsewhere. 106-107 Timor-Leste has an exclusive economic zone of 77,051 square kilometers 29,750 sq mi. 108 The interior of the country is mountainous. 101. 2. With ridges of inactive volcanic mountains extending along the island. 29. 2. Almost half of the country has a slope of at least 40%. The south is slightly less mountainous and has some plains near the coastline. 105. 2. The highest point is Tatamalo, also known as Mount Ramalau, at 2,963 meters 9.7 to 1 ft. 103-109. Most rivers dry up at least partially during the dry season. 104. 2. Outside of some coastal areas and river valleys, the soil is shallow and prone to erosion, and its quality is poor. 105. 1329. 2. The capital and largest city is Dili. The second largest city is the eastern town of Bocau. 68. 22 Map showing the different types of land cover in Timor-Leste. Land cover. The climate is tropical with relatively stable temperatures throughout the year. A wet season lasts from December to May throughout the country, and lasts slightly longer in the south. 105.5 and the interior due to the effect of a monsoon from Australia. 29. 2. During this period, rainfall can reach 2 to 5 millimeters 879. In the dry season, it drops to 12-18 millimeters 047-071 in. 105.5 The country is vulnerable to flooding and landslides that occur as a result of heavy rain, especially when rainfall levels are increased by the La Nina effect. 105.13 The mountainous interior is cooler than the coasts. 103. Coastal areas are heavily dependent on groundwater, which faces pressure from mismanagement, deforestation, and climate change. 105.14 While the temperature is thought to have experienced a small increase due to climate change, there has been little change in annual rainfall. 105.6 Coastal ecosystems around the country are diverse and varied, with vary spatially between the north and south coastlines, as well as between the eastern tip and areas more to the west. These ecosystems include coral reefs, as the country's waters are part of the Coral Triangle Biodiversity Hotspot. 102.28 The easternmost area of Timor-Leste consists of the Pachau Range and the Lake Ira-Lalaro area, which contains the country's first conservation area, the Nino Conas Santana National Park. 110. It contains the last remaining tropical dry forested area within the country. It hosts a number of unique plant and animal species and is sparsely populated. 111. The northern coast is characterized by a number of coral reef systems that have been determined to be at risk. 11 to 113 There are around 41,000 terrestrial plant species in the country. Forests covered 35% of Timor-Leste's land in the mid-2010s. 114. The forests of the northern coast, central uplands, and southern coast are distinct. 104. Timor-Leste is home to the Timor and wetter deciduous forests ecoregion. 115. There is some environmental protection in law, but it has not been a government priority. 68. 27102. 1014. In addition to climate change, local ecosystems are threatened by deforestation, land degradation, overfishing, and pollution. 114.2-3. Timor-Leste's fauna is diverse and contains a number of endemic and threatened species. The Timor and wetter deciduous forests region, which covers the entire island, has 38 mammal species. Timor-Leste's two endemic mammal species are the Timor shrew and the Timorese horseshoe bat. The country's and region's largest mammal, the Javan rusa, and its only native marsupial, the northern common cuscus, are both believed to have been introduced to the island in prehistoric times by settlers from the Lesser Sunda Islands and New Guinea, respectively. Other mammals found in Timor-Leste include the crab-eating macaque, a large number of species of bats, and the aquatic mammal, the dugong. Timor-Leste also has its own native horse breed, the Timor pony. Timor-Leste's terrestrial biodiversity is most visible in its native bird species. As of 2022, a total of 289 bird species are found in Timor-Leste. Significantly threatened bird species include the endangered Timor green pigeon and wetter ground dove and the critically endangered yellow-crested cockatoo. Timor-Leste has an endemic subspecies of the iris lorikeet S.I. rubrapilium. Along with the Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, the Philippines, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Australia, Timor-Leste is one of the countries located in the Coral Triangle, the site of the most biodiverse coral reefs in the world. 116117 in particular, Arturo Island's coral reefs have been recognized as having the highest average fish biodiversity of any site surveyed, with reef sites off Arturo carrying an average of 253 different species. 118 The highest number of species recorded from a single site in Timor-Leste was 642 different fish species, ranking second out of surveyed sites after Indonesia's Raja Ampat Islands. 119 Additionally, the reefs appear to have suffered limited damage from coral bleaching and rising ocean temperatures compared to other sites in the Coral Triangle. 1201-1122. However, despite being in relatively pristine condition, the reefs remain threatened by climate change and habitat destruction, especially blast fishing. It is believed that this has most affected large marine species such as sharks. Despite the diversity of the reefs, there were a significant lack of sharks recorded in the surveys of 2016. Timor-Leste's isolation and lack of tourism are believed to have helped preserve the reefs, as opposed to tourist-heavy locales such as Bali, where the abundance of tourism has negatively affected the health of the reefs. The Timorese government and local residents of Arturo have made attempts to preserve the reefs through education of local citizens, rejecting harmful development projects, and placing emphasis on traditional laws of preserving nature, called Tarabandu. 1-3-1-4 Economyman article, Economy of Timor-Leste graph showing GDP since 2000 peaking at 2012 and beginning to rise again after a subsequent fall nominal GDP of Timor-Leste previous and data. The economy of Timor-Leste is a market economy, although it is dependent upon the export of a few commodities 1 to 5 and has a large public sector. Internally, market operations are limited by widespread poverty. 68-20 The country uses the United States dollar, producing its own coins to facilitate smaller transactions. 1-6 1-7 The economy is generally open to foreign investment, although a prohibition on foreigners owning land means many require a local partner in the country. 68-20 Competition is limited by the small size of the economy, rather than any government barriers. There are far more imports than exports. 68-21 And prices for goods are often higher than in nearby countries. 68-27 Inflation is strongly affected by government spending. 1-8-257 Growth has been slow, averaging just 2.5% per year from 2011 to 2021. 1-9-24 Most of the country is very poor, with just more than 40% living under the national poverty line. This poverty is especially prevalent in rural areas, where many are subsistence farmers or fishermen. Even in urban areas, the majority are poor. Overall, women are poorer than men, often being employed in lower-paying careers. 18 malnutrition is common, with over half of children showing stunted growth, 1 to 8 to 5. While 91% of married working age 15-49 men were employed as of 2016, only 43% of married working age women were. There are small disparities in favor of men in terms of home and land ownership and owning a bank account. 13014 The eastern three municipalities, which contain around a quarter of the population, has less poverty than the western areas, which contain 50% of the population. 70-1 for 66% of families are in part supported by subsistence activities. However, the country as a whole does not produce enough food to be self-sustaining, and thus relies on imports. 105-16 Agricultural work carries the implication of poverty, and the sector receives little investment from the government. 128-26 94% of domestic fish catch comes from the ocean, especially coastal fisheries. 105-17 Those in the capital of Dili are on average better off, although they remain poor by international standards. 128-257 The small size of the private sector means the government is often the customer of public businesses. A quarter of the national population works in the informal economy, with the official public and private sectors employing 9% each. 68-18 of those of working age, around 23% are in the formal sector, 21% are students, and 27% are subsistence farmers and fishers. 68-21 The economy is mostly cash-based, with little commercial credit available from banks. 1-9, 11-12 Remittances from overseas workers add up to around $100 million annually. 1-8, 257 For coins with the official name of Timor-Leste surrounding various motifs. Fractional coins, centavos, used locally as part of the United States dollar. This poverty belies significant wealth in terms of natural resources, which at the time of independence had per capita value equivalent to the wealth of an upper-middle income country. Over half of this was in oil, and over a quarter natural gas. The Timor-Leste Petroleum Fund was established in 2005 to turn these non-renewable resources into a more sustainable form of wealth. 102-6 From 2005 to 2021, $23 billion earned from oil sales has entered the fund. $8 billion has been generated from investments, while $12 billion has been spent. 68-30 A decrease in oil and gas reserves led to decreasing HDI beginning in 2010. 68-18 80% of government spending comes from this fund, which as of 2021 had $19 billion, 10 times greater than the size of the national budget. As oil income has decreased, the fund is at risk of being exhausted. Withdrawals have exceeded sustainable levels almost every year since 2009. 68-23 Resources within the Bayuandan field are expected to soon run out, while extracting those within the so far undeveloped Greater Sunrise field has proven technically and politically challenging. Remaining potential reserves are also losing value as oil and gas become less favored sources of energy. 1-8, 264-7 to 131 The country's economy is dependent on government spending and, to a lesser extent, assistance from foreign donors. 132 Government spending decreased beginning in 2012, which had knock-on effects in the private sector over the following years. The government and its state-owned oil company often invest in large private projects. Decreasing government spending was matched with a decrease in GDP growth. 68-18 After the Petroleum Fund, the second largest source of government income is taxes. Tax revenue is less than 8% of GDP, lower than many other countries in the region and with similarly sized economies. Other government income comes from 23 autonomous agencies, which include port authorities, infrastructure companies, and the National University of Timor-Leste. 1-9, 13, 28,309 Overall, government spending remains among the highest in the world. 1-9, 12 Although investment into education, health, and water infrastructure is negligible. 1-8, 260 Private sector development has lagged due to human capital shortages, infrastructure weakness, an incomplete legal system, and an inefficient regulatory environment. 132 Property rights remain ill-defined, with conflicting titles from Portuguese and Indonesian rule, as well as needing to accommodate traditional customary rights. 68-23 As of 2010, 87.7% of urban 3-1, 0 for 3 people, and 18.9% of rural 8-1, 4 5-9 people households have electricity, for an overall average of 38-133. The private sector shrank between 2014 and 2018, despite a growing working age population. Agriculture and manufacturing are less productive per capita than at independence. 128, 255 to 56 non-oil economic sectors have failed to develop. 134, and growth in construction and administration is dependent on oil revenue. 128 to 56. The dependence on oil shows some aspects of a resource curse. 135, coffee made up 90% of all non-fossil fuel exports from 2013 to 2019, with all such exports totaling to around $20 million annually. 128 to 57, in 2017, the country was visited by 75,000 tourists. Timor-Leste recorded a population of 1,183,643 in its 2015 census, 5 which rose to 1,341,737 at the 2022 census. 137. 23. The population lives mainly along the coastline, where all urban areas are located. 102. 27. Those in urban areas generally have more formal education, employment prospects, and health care. While a strong gender disparity exists throughout the country, it is less severe in the urban capital. The wealthy minority often go abroad for health, education, and other purposes. 68. 25. The population is young, with the median age being under 20. 68. 29. In particular, a large proportion of the male population over 14, almost 45% in 2015, are between the ages of 15 and 24, the third largest male youth bulge in the world. 70. 212. The government of Timor-Leste's website lists the English-language demonym for Timor-Leste as Timorese. 138. Other reference sources listed as East Timorese. 139140. The word Maberdi, formerly used by the Portuguese to refer to native East Timorese and often employed as synonymous with the illiterate and uneducated, was adopted by Fredolin as a term of pride. 141. Healthcare received 6% of the national budget in 2021. 68. 24. From 1990 to 2019, life expectancy rose from 48.5 to 69.5. Expected years of schooling rose from 9.8 to 12.4 between 2000 and 2010, while mean years of schooling rose from 2.8 to 4.4. Progress since 2010 for these has been limited. Gross national income per capita similarly peaked in 2010 and has decreased since. 142. 3. As of 2016, 45.8% of East Timorese were impoverished, 16.3% severely so. 142. 6. The fertility rate, which at the time of independence was the highest in the world at 7. 8. 143 dropped to 4.2. It is relatively higher in rural areas and among poorer 130. 3 and less literate households. 144. As of 2016, the average household size was 5.3, with 41% of people aged under 15 and 18% of households headed by women. 130. Infant mortality stood at 30 per 1,000, down from 60 per 1,000 in 2003. 130. 746% of children under 5 showed stunted growth, down from 58% in 2010. Working age adult obesity increased from 5% to 10% during the same time period. As of 2016, 40% of children, 23% of women, and 13% of men had anemia. Timorese communities are not strictly defined by ethnic background or linguistic group. Separate communities may share ethnicity or language, and many areas show overlaps and hybridization between ethnic and linguistic groups. 100. 44. Familial relations and descent, which are interlinked with sacred house affiliation, are a more important indicator of identity. 100. 47. Each family group generally identifies with a single language or dialect. 100. 49. With this immense local variation in mind, there is a broad cultural and identity distinction between the East Bokau, Lot M, and Vikek municipalities and the west of the country, a product of history more than it is of linguistic and ethnic differences. 100. 45. 47. Although it is very loosely associated with the two language groups, 145, 142, 143, there is a small Mestio population of mixed Portuguese and local descent. 146. There is also a small Chinese minority, most of whom are Hakka. 147. 148. Many Chinese left in the mid-1970s as many were disproportionately targeted during the Indonesian occupation, but a significant number have also returned to Timor-Leste following the end of Indonesian occupation. 149. Timor-Leste has a small community of Timorese Indian, specifically of Goan descent. 150. As well as historical immigration from Africa and Yemen. 146. Members of these immigrant minority groups have played important roles in Timor-Leste's history. Nobel Peace Prize laureate, former Prime Minister, and current President Jose Ramos Horta, and current Prime Minister and former President Xanana Gusmão are both of Portuguese Timorese mestizo background, while former Prime Minister and Freudian Secretary General Mari Alkatiri is a Hadrami Arab whose ancestors were from Yemen. Citation needed, likely reflecting the mixed origins of the different ethno-linguistic groups of the island. The indigenous languages fall into two language families, Austronesian and Papuan. 29, 10 depending on how they are classified. There are up to 19 indigenous languages with up to 30 dialects, 145, 136 aside from Tidum. Ethnologue lists the following indigenous languages: Adabe, Baikino, Bunak, Fadaluku, Kaluli, Haban, Idat, Kairui Midiki, Kamak, Lakalai, Makasi, Makuva, Mambi, Nawat, Tukadid, and Waima. 151. According to the Atlas of the World's Languages in Danger, there are 6 endangered languages in Timor-Leste: Adabe, Habu, Kairui Midiki, Makua, Naweti, and Waima. 152. The largest Malayo-Polynesian group is the Tidum. 153. Mostly around Dili or the western border. Other Malayo-Polynesian languages with native speakers of more than 40,000 are Mambai in the central mountains south of Dili, Baikino in Oecussi, Kamak in the northwest interior, and Tokadid on the northwest coast. 154-155. The main Papuan languages spoken are Bunak in the center of Timor, especially within Babanaro municipality, Makasi in the eastern Bokau and Vikek municipalities, and Fadaluku in the eastern Lot M municipality. 100-43. The 2015 census found that the most commonly spoken mother tongues were Tidum Prasa mother tongue for 30.6% of the population, Mambai 16.6, Makasai 10.5, Tidum Tarik 6.05, Baikanu 5.87, Kamak 5.85, Bunak 5.48, Tokadid 3.97, and Fadaluku 3.52. Other indigenous languages accounted for 10.47%, while 1.09% of the population spoke foreign languages natively. 156. An extinct Portuguese Creole language, Bidao Creole Portuguese, was spoken in the Dili suburb of Bidao, Nain Fido, spoken by the Portuguese Timorese mestizo population. It went extinct by the 1960s. A dialect of Malay-based local Creole called Dili Malay is spoken by a number of residents in the capital Dili. Citation needed. Timor-Leste's 2 official languages are Portuguese and Tidum. In addition, English and Indonesian are designated by the Constitution as working languages. 101-3157. This is within the final and transitional provisions, which do not set a final date. In 2012, 35% could speak, read, and write Portuguese, which is up significantly from less than 5% in the 2006 Undevelopment Report. Portuguese is recovering as it has now been made the main official language of Timor and is being taught in most schools. 157-158. The use of Portuguese for government information and in the court system provides some barriers to access for those who do not speak it. 69. Tidum is also not understood by everyone in the country. 29. 11. According to the Observatory of the Portuguese Language, the East Timorese literacy rate was 77.8% in Tidum, 55.6% in Indonesian, and 39.3% in Portuguese, and that the primary literacy rate increased from 73% in 2009 to 83% in 2012-159. According to the 2015 census, 50% of the population between the ages of 14 and 24 can speak and understand Portuguese. 160. The 2015 census found around 15% of those over the age of 5 were literate in English. 161. Education. A classroom with schoolchildren and teacher Escola Portuguesa Rui Chinati. The Portuguese School of Timor-Leste's adult literacy rate was 68% among adults and 84% among those aged 15-24 as of 2021. It is slightly higher among women than men, 68. 27 more girls than boys attend school, although some drop out upon reaching puberty. 68. 25. As of 2016, 22% of working-age women 15-49 and 19% of working-age men had no education, 15% of women and 18% of men had some primary education, 52% of women and 51% of men had some secondary education, and 11% of women and 12% of men. Overall, 75% of women and 82% of men were literate. 130. Two primary schools exist throughout the country, although the quality of materials and teaching is often poor. Secondary schools are generally limited to municipal capitals. Education takes up 10% of the national budget. 68.27. The country's main university is the National University of Timor-Leste. There are also 4 colleges. 162. Since independence, both Indonesian and Tidom have lost ground as media of instruction, while Portuguese has increased. In 2001, only 8.4% of primary school and 6.8% of secondary school students attended a Portuguese medium school. By 2005, this had increased to 81.6% for primary and 46.3% for secondary schools. 163. Indonesian formerly played a considerable role in education, being used by 73.7% of all secondary school students as a medium of instruction, but by 2005 Portuguese was used by most schools in Bocau, Manituto, as well as the capital district. 163. Portugal provides support to about 3% of the public schools in Timor-Leste, focused on those in urban areas, further encouraging the use of the Portuguese language. Religion. Main article, Religion in Timor-Leste. A large white church with a mass of people in front of Igreja da Imaculada Conceição Church in Vicwick. While the Constitution of Timor-Leste enshrines the principles of freedom of religion and separation of church and state, Section 45.1 also acknowledges the participation of the Catholic Church in the process of national liberation in its preamble. 164. Upon independence, the country joined the Philippines to become the only 2 predominantly Catholic states in Asia, although nearby parts of eastern Indonesia such as Flores and parts of western New Guinea also have Catholic majorities. 165-166. According to the 2022 census, 97.6% of the population is Catholic, 1.979% Protestant, 0.24% Muslim, 0.08% traditional, 0.05% Buddhist, 0.02% Hindu, and 0.08% other religions. 1. A 2016 survey conducted by the Demographic and Health Survey Program showed that Catholics made up 98.3% of the population, Protestants 1.2%, and Muslims 3.167. The number of churches grew from 100 in 1974 to more than 800 in 1994. 162. With church membership having grown considerably under Indonesian rule, as Pancasila, Indonesia's state ideology, requires all citizens to believe in God and historically did not recognize traditional beliefs. East Timorese animist belief systems did not fit with Indonesia's constitutional monotheism, resulting in mass conversions to Christianity. Portuguese clergy were replaced with Indonesian priests, and Latin and Portuguese Mass was replaced by Indonesian Mass. 168. While just 20% of East Timorese called themselves Catholics at the time of the 1975 invasion, the figure surged to reach 95% by the end of the first decade after the invasion. 168-169. The Catholic Church divides Timor-Leste into 3 dioceses: the Archdiocese of Dili, the Diocese of Bocau, and the Diocese of Maliana. 170. In rural areas, Catholicism is often syncretized with local animist beliefs. 171. The number of Timorese Protestants and Muslims declined significantly after September 1999, as these groups were disproportionately represented among supporters of integration with Indonesia. Fewer than half of previous Protestant congregations existed after September 1999, and many Protestants were among those who remained in West Timor. 172. Culture. Article, Culture of Timor-Leste. Women dancing in traditional outfits incorporating feathers and ties. Cloth. Traditional Timorese dancers. The many cultures within Timor-Leste stem from the several waves of Austronesian and Melanesian migration that led to the current population, with unique identities and traditions developing within each petty kingdom. Portuguese authorities built upon traditional structures, blending Portuguese influence into the existing political and social systems. 32. 91-92. The presence of the Catholic Church created a point of commonality across the various ethnic groups, despite full conversion remaining limited. The Portuguese language also provided common linkages, even if direct Portuguese impact was limited. 32. 97-98. Under Indonesian rule, resistance strengthened cultural links to Catholicism and the Portuguese language. At the same time, Indonesian cultural influence was spread through schools and administration. 32. 98-99 The preservation of traditional beliefs in the face of Indonesian attempts to suppress them became linked to the creation of the country's national identity. 101. 713 This national identity only began to emerge at the very end of Portuguese rule, and further developed during Indonesian rule. 145. 134 136 Following independence, a civic identity began to develop. This was most clearly expressed through enthusiasm for national-level democracy. 145, 155, 156 and was reflected in politics through a shift from resistance narratives to development ones. 173, 3 The capital has developed a more cosmopolitan culture, while rural areas maintain stronger traditional practices. 68, 30 Internal migration into urban areas, especially Dili, creates cultural links between these areas and rural hinterlands. Those in urban areas often continue to identify with a specific rural area, even those with multiple generations born in Dili. 100, 53-54 The presence of so many ethnic and linguistic groups means cultural practices vary across the country. 101, 11 These practices reflect historical social structures and practices where political leaders were regarded as having spiritual powers. Ancestry was an important part of cultural practices and partly signified leadership. Leaders often had influence over land use, and these leaders continue to play an informal role in land disputes and other aspects of community practice today. An important traditional concept is lulik, or sacredness. Some lulik ceremonies continue to reflect animist beliefs, for example through divination ceremonies which vary throughout the country. Sacred status can also be associated with objects, such as Portuguese flags which have been passed down within families. 101, 713 A wooden house on stilts with a thatch roof. Sacred house Litinu in Los Balos. Community life is centered around sacred houses lulik, physical structures which serve as a representative symbol and identifier for each community. 100, 47-49 The architectural style of these houses varies between different parts of the country. Although following widespread destruction by Indonesian forces, many were rebuilt with cheap modern materials. 174, 22-25 The house as a concept extends beyond the physical object to the surrounding community. 32, 90-93, 96 Kinship systems exist within and between houses. Traditional leaders, who stem from historically important families, retain key roles in administering justice and resolving disputes through methods that vary between communities. 100, 47-49 Such leaders are often elected to official leadership positions, merging cultural and historical status with modern political status. 100, 52 The concept of being part of a communal house has been extended to the nation, with parliament serving as the national sacred house. 32, 96 Art styles vary throughout the various ethno-linguistic groups of the island. Nonetheless, similar artistic motifs are present throughout, such as large animals and particular geometric patterns. Some art is traditionally associated with particular genders. 175. For example, the ties textiles that play a widespread role in traditional life throughout the island are traditionally handwoven by women. 176 Different ties patterns are associated with different communities and more broadly with linguistic groups. 145, 137 Many buildings within central Dili maintain historical Portuguese architecture. 177, I5 Traditional rituals remain important, often mixed in with more modern aspects. 145, 137 A strong oral history is highlighted in individuals able to recite long stories or poetry. 178. This history, or lianane, passes down traditional knowledge. 174, 16 There remains a strong tradition of poetry. 179 Prime Minister Zenana Gusmo, for example, is a distinguished poet, earning the moniker Poet Warrior. 180 In the field of cinema, Timor-Leste released its first feature-length film, a period thriller titled Beatrice's War, in 2013. 181 Shot with a limited budget by a mix of local filmmakers and a volunteer Australian film crew, the film depicted East Timorese life under Indonesian occupation in the 1970s, with producer Lourdes Pires acknowledging their aim to diverge from the government's friendship and forgiveness policy for its past conflicts by telling a story of truth-seeking and justice. 182 to Media See also list of newspapers in Timor-Leste and freedom of the press in Timor-Lesten's papers are concentrated in Dili, and they are mostly published in the television stations are also concentrated in Dili, with only one Dili-based station available outside the city. Radio is the most popular form of mass media due to various reasons, such as a low literacy rate, the cost of newspapers relative to the average income, and it being broadcast in regional languages. Press freedom is mixed. As of 2022, 37% of the country were internet users.